Blackened tree trunks and branches stripped bare, hollow cement foundations gaping open toward the sky, the houses that once capped them all but memories. The metal remains of barbecue grills and tool chests and clothes dryers lying mangled on the ground like some puppy's chew toy. We've all seen the breathtaking and heartbreaking images coming our way from West Kelowna and the Shuswap region. A couple of weeks ago, our hearts all beat a little harder as we vicariously felt the anxiety that arises when a city of 20,000 is given less than 2 days to evacuate, and there's literally only one road in a 14-hour drive. For some of us, we have children or siblings or friends still waiting to find out how their places and possessions will fare, knowing all too well that the final word on this summer's wildfires, that word is still far from being spoken. In the face of all of that, I confess that it seems at least a bit ironic, if not even insensitive, to be hearing the story of Moses and the so-called burning bush this morning. The bush that was ablaze but somehow was not consumed. After all, most of us are all too aware of these fires raging around us. The numbers are beyond comprehension. As of yesterday, for example, the fire near Hay River in the Northwest Territories had burned through more than 4,000 square kilometers. For comparison, this whole Fraser Valley from Hope on down through Chilliwack and Abbotsford and through the entire rest of Metro Vancouver all the way out to the sea, it's only about 3,000 square kilometers. You'd have to throw in the greater Victoria area twice on top of that to reach 4,000. Records have been broken from coast to coast to coast, not just here in BC or the north, but if you remember back to the late spring, if your memory can go that far, even Nova Scotia, of all places, saw the largest recorded fires in its history, and not just off in the woods right next to Halifax. And honestly, let's be real here. There's much about life these days that already seemed like it had been ablaze even before the wildfire season got its early start. The magnitude of the fire crisis, after all, is just a symptom of the much longer and larger raging climate crisis. On our streets, at our own kitchen tables, we see the faces of those whose lives are in jeopardy from the toxic drug crisis. Our newspapers and television screens and social media feeds, well, at least until that bill this summer, they smolder too with protests and counter-protests, labor unrest, financial instability, the ranting and ravings and mugshots of fear-mongering demigods. And my friends, there are no helicopter water drops for those kinds of wildfires. And whatever fire trenches we try to encircle ourselves with, in the face of those ones, they simply lull us into pretending that everything's fine while the forest burns around us. And so, as I said, it seems more than a little ironic to step into the pages of Scripture this morning to be met by a burning bush. Or if not ironic, then a little bit too on the nose. Moses had tried to dig a fire trench, as it were, around his own life. For those of you who were with us here last week when we first met Moses as a baby, saved from the murderous machinations of Egypt's king, the Pharaoh, by the subversive actions of brave yet ordinary women. We've jumped ahead now, many years in today's story. As we always say, they grow up so fast. Moses is all grown up now, after having been raised by Pharaoh's daughter as a member of Pharaoh's own, the Egyptian king's household. Moses has come to learn that he is, in fact, a member of the Hebrew people, the ones that Pharaoh and the Egyptian leadership were enslaving, even if he, Moses himself, had not had to endure that same forced labor and slavery and oppression. One day, Moses observes the treatment that his fellow Hebrew kinfolk are receiving at the hands of the Egyptians. In particular, he witnesses an Egyptian beating a Hebrew person. And looking this way and that, seeing no one, Moses decides to take matters into his own hands himself and kills the Egyptian who was beating up on his kinfolk, hides his body in the sand. And yet, his action had not, in fact, gone unseen. Soon enough, he attracts the scorn of other Hebrews even, and then the retribution of Pharaoh. And so Moses flees, off to the edges of society, safe, he thinks, from the fiery wrath of the peoples he has known, both Hebrew and Egyptian. No place, however, is outside the reach of God. As the psalmist reminds us, where can I go from your spirit, or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. Look up Psalm 139 if you want to hear the rest. Having wandered off even further than he'd already done, off into the wilderness, something like a wildfire catches Moses' attention. But this was no ordinary wildfire, at least nothing like we here in BC ever see. The bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. The symbol of the burning bush, blazing but not consumed, has inspired many people of faith down through the centuries. In particular, it has become an icon, a logo, if you will, for the faith and life of some of our own faith traditions' ancestors. If you walk past the headquarters of the Church of Scotland in Edinburgh, for example, you will see hanging over the doorway the church's official crest with a bush blazing away at its center. And the words, quote, "and yet it was not consumed," carved around the edge. Perhaps you'll recognize that we here in the United Church of Canada have incorporated that same blazing, burning bush into our crest in honor of the Presbyterian faith and Church of Scotland roots that, among others, were incorporated into our United Church when we were formed back in 1925. It was actually a group known as the Huguenots, though, who first adopted the burning bush as a symbol for their church and their faith. The Huguenots, they were some of our earliest forebears in the Calvinist family that includes us in the United Church, and along with other Presbyterian and Reformed and Congregationalist and United and Uniting Church traditions. These early Protestants in France, back in the 1500s and 1600s, they faced great hostility and tremendous outright oppression from the majority Roman Catholic society and power structure of France. And that eventually forced most of them to flee to other places like the Netherlands and Great Britain, and to many of the colonies of those countries like South Africa, New York, and our own Nova Scotia here in Canada. To the Huguenots, the symbol of the burning bush, this is where I'm going with all this. The symbol of, not just a church history lesson here, the symbol of the burning bush spoke to them of the reality that even though they suffered, even though they were persecuted for their faith, nevertheless they survived and they lived. By God's grace, present with them and present in their struggle, they would not be consumed. They would persevere, not by their own strength, but by God alone. Or, even more, the presence of God that sets the bush ablaze is the very same presence that gives and sustains life itself. Indeed, for all of the trauma that the wildfires around us this year and in many recent years have caused, most of us know that fire itself, and even a forest fire, is not always a bad thing. Forest fires are naturally occurring, as it turns out. They serve as part of the life cycle of the forest ecosystem. They benefit the entire forest ecosystem, returning nutrients to the soil by burning old vegetation. They encourage new growth by allowing sunlight to reach the forest floor. Under the sweeping fire suppression policies here in North America in the 20th and 21st centuries, though, the dynamics of forest fires have dramatically shifted. And some would argue that the forest is less healthy for it. Now, let's be clear here. I'm not saying that the loss of life and property that we are now experiencing when wildfires rage is a good thing or part of God's plan or anything like that. But nevertheless, fire is not always a bad thing. The bone that is broken sometimes gets stronger at the place the break occurs. The muscle that is stressed sometimes grows right where we've exercised it. The fire, it can cleanse, it can renew, it can even bring life. For Moses, the sight of the burning bush brought both curiosity and confrontation. To his credit, Moses doesn't choose to bury his head even further into the sand when he encounters that bush. I must turn aside and look at this great sight, he says, and see why the bush is not burned up. And then, of course, the rest is history. As we've heard, the voice of God speaks to him out of the fire, calling him, the one who is unsure of where he fits in, the one who has run off just to keep his head down. God calls him to be the one who will lead the journey of liberation, together with God bringing the Israelites out of Egypt. In hearing that call, Moses is confronted with his uncertainty about his own identity. As I mentioned earlier, is because of the path, the rather unique path that his life had taken, born a Hebrew but brought up in like one of Pharaoh's own grandchildren, he doesn't quite fit in really anywhere. At the moment that he encounters God in God's presence in the bush, Moses is living a life a bit on the run, like so many others who came before him and so many others who will come after him, keeping his distance from either of the communities that he came from among. Moses' uncertainty about his own identity, it also came down to that all too human and, quite frankly, all too universal question about ability and worthiness. Are you sure you've got the right guy? Moses asks. Me? Who am I that you would send me? Moses asks God, why him? And God offers the most profound non-response possible. I will be with you. Why me? I will be with you. Who am I? I, God, will be with you. Moses feels inadequate, and God's response basically says, it's not about you, Moses. Or at least, it is about you, but it's not about whether you have enough power and enough wisdom and enough eloquence and all the rest on your own. It's about finding out who you are in the midst of the challenge and the struggle. And about finding out what you are capable of by joining me, God, in what I am setting out to do in the world. Moses would find his truest identity and God's truest identity forged in the fire, not just the fire that didn't consume the bush, but the fire of the struggle, of freedom and liberation and life with God. In the face of something as cataclysmic and catastrophic as wildfires and climate change more broadly, it can be very easy to feel inadequate and discouraged. Like there's no possible way that what little things I might do could make a meaningful difference. We get anxious, paralyzed, we disassociate even. And yet, we can remember that millions of people are doing the opposite and are reflecting on how they can respond every day. Regardless of how many other people had walked that path in the wilderness right past that burning bush and didn't even take notice, who knows how many did? Eventually there was Moses, who did take notice. Eventually there was the one who did do the thing. We are not the first generation to wonder who we are in the face of tremendous signs and challenges all around us. Citing the example of an ancient saint named Bridget, who lived in the 5th and 6th centuries in Ireland. Spiritual director and writer Daniel Wolpert testifies that Bridget never seemed to ask if feeding one person could bring peace in the wake of the empire or calm the turmoil of sparring warlords. And then he goes on to apply Bridget's example as inspiration for how we might make way amidst the challenges of today. In the same way, he writes, we need not shrug off carbon-saving actions because one person can't change the climate. Walking down the street, I can often spot dozens of people doing things that produce excess emissions who could change their behaviors if they became more aware. Maybe each one of us is inadequate, but God is the one who binds us together. And together, with God, all things are possible. In the face of all our questions of who am I, what can I do, God's constant refrain echoes through the centuries. You are mine. I am with you. In the bright sunshine of victory and in the deep shadows of death, I am with you. In your weakness and doubt, still I, God, am who I am. In your strength and your courage, I, God, will be who I will be. Amidst your sorrow and your struggle, I will be the one who sends you and walks with you, now and forevermore. Blessing and honor, glory and power be unto God now and forever. Amen.